Okay, I'm gonna spotlight myself. Cool. Yay, Farah's here. Okay, I'm spotlighting. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Alanna Risse, and I teach Interactive Media 1 and 2 at PSU in the design department. And I have invited Aimée. Yes, I've done it correctly. I'll tell you a story about that later, why it's hard for me. But I have invited Aimée to talk to my class and other PSU graphic design students because she's got tons of experience in design and has transitioned into UX and product design. So I want to read her bio to you. Aimée is currently product design lead at Meta Facebook in New York, where she leads the design group for their live social audio product, and initially led the design for the News tab product when first joining the company. Before joining Meta, she was director of product design at Postlight, head of design at QuickFrame, senior user experience designer at AKQA PDX and New York, and senior visual designer focused on UX at eRoy. Is that how you pronounce eRoy?
Exactly.
Okay. The sampling of brands that she's worked on: MailChimp, Kaiser Permanente, Nike, Verizon, The Skim, San Francisco Muni, Cliff Bar, and NRG. Aimée founded and created Design Elephants, a quarterly event focused on problematic areas in design. And I really want to talk about that. So I'm excited that you're here. Aimée was the creative director of Ladies Night PDX, a professional group of lady identifying folks, which produces networking and educational events to help empower women, not only in the workplace, but in their everyday lives as well. Aimée has a BFA in design and visual communications from PNCA, an MA in art history from SF State, and a BA in Spanish literature from the University of Oregon. I first met her not in the design world, but actually in the art world in the Bay Area. She was a curator at a gallery in San Francisco, and she was asked to jury an art show where she selected me to participate in. It was called Bay Area Currents, and there were like 8 to 10 artists in the show. It was like an annual show. And soon after that, we both moved to Portland. We kind of like stayed in touch. She ended up going to PNCA for design, and I had kind of been in the like web world, and I ended up going to PNCA for art. So we kind of like flipped. Both of us were flipping our careers. Let's see, yeah. So she transitioned into the world of product design, UX, UI, and I've gotten to watch that career shift mostly over social media. But it's been super fun. I've been to some of the Ladies Night PDX events too in Portland, which are they still, I mean, COVID, but it seems like they're still partly active. We'll see what happens after
I
COVID.
think so. I think that they've kind of like evolved and, I don't know exactly what they're doing. I see like every now and again that they're having events and stuff like that. So I hope that they're still going strong because it was
Yeah,
a
it
really
was
fun group of women.
really awesome. Yeah. Let's see. And I'd like her to share with us her natural shift from design to UX to product design, and to spend some time clarifying the overlaps and differences she's encountered in the various roles and titles she has inhabited. There's lots of like hat swapping and multiple hats. MA, yes, the class I teach at PSU is Interactive Media 1 and 2. My students are mostly juniors and seniors who have developed their design chops, but most of them have never touched code, like HTML, CSS, or JavaScript. So I have the fun job of introducing them to the world of code so that they understand the process better. And I try to hook some of them into pursuing careers that involve code in some way. And also because I believe coding boosts people's problem-solving skills and can apply to all walks of life. And maybe we can talk more about how knowing at least a little bit of code can really help you as a designer. And yeah, so welcome. Thank you for coming. And I wanted to maybe start the conversation with you giving us a description of what you do now at Meta, and maybe the journey of how you got to be a product designer there.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I just want to say it's so nice to meet all of you. Thank you for coming to hear me speak on a, what is it, Wednesday night? I'm sure that there's a million other things you guys could be doing. So I really appreciate that your interest. Yeah, so I'm at Meta, formerly known as Facebook. I still am kind of playing with those like Meta, Facebook, what is it? But yeah, so I've been there I started in August of 2020. Believe it or not, I got a new job during the pandemic and started there. I started on the news team. I was in the news tab product team, helping to lead the design there in terms of like their news product and quality and experience and all that stuff. And then last August, I actually transferred into the entertainment org where I'm working on a social audio product. So their live social audio product, helping to kind of like think about that experience, think about how creators would want to be able to access their audiences in a really kind of like less impactful way. I mean, I think a lot of the times you think about creators creating content when it comes to like video, like, you have TikTok, you have Reels, you have, all the like YouTube. And so I'm working really in the audio space, which I really find exciting because I think it's a wonderful area to think about how we can get users to engage and consume content, but not have to be married to a screen to do it. So they're able to, listen and have conversations and engage with their favorite creators, but they can also be folding their laundry or driving or doing whatever that they need to do at that point too. So that's currently what I'm overseeing there. I'm the only designer. I work with about 10 engineers. Which is really great and fun. I have really grown to love working with engineers in my career because it has really, we can put together prototypes and pixels all day long, but it's really with your collaboration and your relationships with engineers that are going to help you breathe life into those experiences that you're kind of thinking about. So it's been a really great experience being able to work on something that's a little bit of a new product, coming up with new experiences and being able to collaborate in product creation.
Very cool. So I often hear the ratio of designers to developers is 1 to 10. Is that what you have experienced in your career?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends, where, I mean, the one thing I've learned in my navigation of a career in design is nothing is the same anywhere you go. And nothing is the same no matter what client you work with. Nothing is the same no matter like what company you work in or what role you might take on. So I think sometimes, I can be on sometimes it's been like a really design heavy team with less engineers, and right now, like in my former role, there was like more designers, there was more of a designer engineering relationship. And then this specific one, this role I specifically went to, I am working just myself with 10 engineers, which, so again, it just really depends.
Yeah, and same here. I've seen it where usually there's a design team and there's an engineering team, and they're closely linked, but you have a designer paired with maybe 3 developers, depending on the size of the team or something. So let's talk about this like design. I just want to get right into it.
Let's do it.
So in the olden days, it was design and development. There were kind of two parts. And as things developed, this UX UI role started to appear. And that layer is more like very research heavy, kind of upfront user testing heavy. And so will you kind of talk about how, so you started as a designer, most of your studying at PNCA was design, and then you kind of transitioned fairly quickly into UX. Can you talk about how that happened?
Yeah, so funny enough, even before I went to PNCA, I started kind of dabbling in this career, and that's what ultimately led me to want to apply and go to school, because I kind of wanted a little bit more formal education around design. You don't need it necessarily. You could be self-taught. There's a lot of amazing designers that are out there who are self-taught. So I just want to like clarify that. But for me, I'm a little bit on that like nerdy side where I'm like, I need to know about grids, so like, tell me the rules. And so, yeah, so but before that, it's funny because the way that I kind of got into it was as Alanna said, I used to be a curator in San Francisco and did a lot of art writing and would help put together shows like at the gallery. And part of that, like one of the things I always say when I'm, talking to people about how I got into this career is I say that was really probably my first foray into user experience, because I really had to consider the space I was in and consider the narrative we were trying to tell and consider the story and then select works to go where and how I wanted people to walk through that space to be able to like experience the work. So to me, that's like a really, this really beautiful evolution of my career is where I started there and thinking about how I want users to navigate digital spaces. So I started, like, as I said, I started in curating, and then, I think it was like 2009 or something hit, and we were all like, "Yikes! What are we doing with our jobs?" And so I actually ended up having someone ask me to help them rebrand their store, and I was like, "Okay." And I literally bought Illustrator and was like, "YOLO!" I had never been in a design program. I didn't really know. I knew Adobe because a friend worked there. Like I didn't really know anything about the products. But jumped in and just really like had a knack and like kind of like I wanted to learn more. I just was like really, it was like really self-propelling of like learning about the programs, learning about the different things. And so even before I got to school, I had already like I started dabbling in website. So like started in like Squarespace, like helping to design a Squarespace site for them and helping them rebrand and doing like art photo shoots and doing all those kind of things. And a lot of the times when you start out in your career, you just want to do everything, and it's great because you kind of really learn the gamut of all the different ways that you can touch design can be permeated out into a career, which I think is really fun. So I guess I didn't like what I was saying. So, yeah, so from there I decided to go to PNCA, and so started going to PNCA, and at the time the program was very print based. It was very much about like you do a brochure, do a flyer, do a poster, and I was kind of like, oh, that's not really like what I wanted to learn. And so I ended up taking a class with a professor who ended up being like a real champion for me named Dave Allen. And he had a connection with an agency in Portland. Oh gosh, why am I forgetting the name of the agency? Anyway, they were really into digital design, and he was started kind of talking about what UX and UI. And so that's kind of like really like my first foray and like kind of like exposure to it. And from that point, there wasn't really, I think there's a lot of like great UX programs now and boot camps and all that kind of stuff, but that wasn't really existing when I was in school. And so I ended up kind of just like learning myself. Like I kind of went to the University of YouTube and like really taught myself a lot of things. I read a lot of anything I could get my hands on. And I kind of started to like I decided to start like any project I had moving forward, I was going to make it a digital space. So whether I wanted it to be a website or I wanted it to be a mobile app, it's like, it was just me kind of like playing with it and trying to figure out like, what would that look like to be able to design those products. And so I was really kind of like a self-taught person and kind of just like faked it till I made it, and ultimately ended up getting an internship that kind of just like kicked off my career for me.
Cool. Where was the internship?
It was at a former startup called Globe Sherpa. And so they did travel, they did the TriMet travel app, I think, which is now defunct, but
Oh my gosh.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
so they did that, and I ended up ultimately being able to work on the first iteration of the San Francisco Muni app, which was like one of my like the first times I ever was like, wow, this is like a big project, So that's kind of was like my first foot in the door.
I want to put this out there that if you have questions, feel free to just step in, or if you don't want to talk out loud, which I get, but if you want to ask a question, there's the chat as well. I've also got a whole bunch of questions from class, so we can kind of keep it going. So
Yeah,
and I'm
absolutely.
hyper. Yeah,
And
and
you
I'm
can ask me
hyper to
anything, like
jump
please
in.
ask me anything that you guys might have. So
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to ask, so you talked about kind of just making your own projects. Did you build out your own portfolio of works that you had just kind of done on your own? Was it a combo? Yeah. So basically
yes.
showing.
Yeah,
I,
so like obviously like to get the internship, you start with the projects you've done in school, right? And then from there you build it with every position that you have, you put in a new project, right? But the other thing I did too was I was really fortunate to have a lot of people, not a lot of people, but I had, I would go to people who were in the industry and be like, will you review my portfolio? Like what's missing? And so I got like a lot of feedback from people about, what people are looking for when they want to hire you, and who are
Mhm.
you trying to like show yourself as a designer, like what kind of design do you want to do, and make sure that that's evident, so that when people are looking at your portfolio, a lot of the times people are just scanning your work, and they're not like reading the paragraphs that you've written, essentially, you know what I mean? They're like
Mhm.
looking at the work, and they want to see like, quickly scan and kind of get a sense of how you think as a designer. And so that was a lot of oh my gosh, I've done so many iterations of my portfolio, you have no idea. Even before like really getting one of my, the first couple of jobs, like I would just work and work and work on my portfolio, because just to try to get it to a spot that I felt like would present myself well as a designer and hopefully have people hire me.
Yeah, portfolios are never ending. That is,
Oh,
that
I
is for
hate them
sure.
so much.
I know I have to, yeah. Um, and I wanted to say, I worked at a boot camp, and taught both UX UI and taught code, and um, the outreach part. So one of the required assignments, which I loved, was that you had to go reach out to someone that you didn't know, just cold call, and try to get someone to respond, to just have like coffee talk, like just reach out and say, hey, can we, after COVID, it was, hey, can we have a Zoom call? But before that, it was like, hey, can I buy you coffee or a beer? And can you, will you look through my portfolio or just give me advice? And I thought it was such a really fantastic assignment, because that's so hard to do that. It's so hard to just reach out to a stranger. So I kind
Yeah,
of,
but it's also good for you to like learn how to build relationships, because that's where a lot of your career comes in, is like building those relationships, whether it's people that you work with, your, cross-functional partners, or, it's someone who might offer you a job that you want down the road. It's like, always think about, you never, the design world is actually really, really small, even in New York. You just never know who you're going to cross from your past or
yeah.
stuff. And so it's like you always want to make sure that you're treating everyone with the most respect, because you will see them again, I promise you.
Yeah, and treat them like a future friend, like
Yes.
just treat them. I mean, like Emma and me are like a perfect example. That was 2000, what, 8 or something?
I
That's
mean, I don't
really,
know if we need to
I know.
say years here.
But yeah, yeah. So just treat everyone like they're maybe already your friend, It's a good way to be. Um, I really want to talk about your elephant project, but I also don't want to like derail us. Um, I'm
I
looking through.
have a question. May I
Yeah,
ask?
yeah, please.
Okay. So it's like it's a multi question, classic question. Um, like, I hear a lot of people say, you don't need school. And I have kind of seen myself in general as a pretty DIY person. Um, and feel like I've learned a lot about design just from being in programs, just from like being out in the world. And so, I've kind of like approached being at PSU because I'm interested specifically in UX, UI stuff, because I had been, prior to that, a three-dimensional artist. I had always seen myself that. And I'm like, I know I don't want to be a digital illustrator. Like, oh God, don't make me illustrate anything for you. Um, Not interested, but like formatting like text and like integrating it on a website or like on an app or in a newsletter or something like that, that's like a level of it that I'm like interested in. So, how, and this could be a question for either you, Alanna or Aimée, either way, like, how do you feel like PSU supports that? Because I have also heard people be like, sometimes it's like a lot of print, or like we're just starting to get into the digital world, in terms of like coding. And then also like, what is the difference, when you say you work with an engineer, engineers, like what are they doing that's not what you are doing? Like how do y'all's jobs differ?
I want Aimée to answer this, but if you remove the PSU part and you just think about school as a place to have like a structure to develop your chops and to have deadlines and pressure is one thing, and also the community that you build at school is a big thing. And so PNCA probably, you know, could just be replaced with PSU as far as that. But yeah, take it away.
Yeah. I mean, I always feel like that's such a that question, it's a good question. And I feel like I don't want to say to you what would work for you because you're an individual and you know what works for you better than I could ever say, right? I will say that for me, myself, I needed school because I needed the structure and I wanted the context and I wanted the history and I needed someone to do that for me because I don't know if I had the discipline to figure that out on my own. So I found value in school in terms of having a structured program, being exposed to a lot of different things that I didn't know. But at the same time, you know, as I was saying earlier, it's like I did a lot of stuff on my own because it was so based in print that I really wanted to go into digital. So I just did that part of the curriculum myself, but it was all based on everything I had learned through PNCA, whether it's grid or typography, because regardless if you're working in print or digital or whatever, it all comes back to that grid. It all comes back to those basics of typography. You know what I mean? And so people who get far in their career without ever going to school is like they're very like talented, specialized people, right? And so they figured out a way to really like learn what they needed to know to be able to and build out those portfolios. So they have that tenacity. So again, I'm kind of like speaking around in circles, but it's because I really don't want to like answer the question for you. I put it back onto you. Like, what do you feel like you would be getting out of it versus what you can get out of it yourself, and for you to decide from there. As a like, and going back to myself, like I needed the school, and I also like really appreciate the relationships I got out of that, you know. And I found my internship through school, and that set me on my path of my career. So I found value in school, but I also am kind of a nerd and need that stuff. So that's not really helpful, I'm sure. But does that kind of like give you kind of like, you know, a little bit of an answer that makes sense versus me just battling on? Because I wanted to get to your second part of the question too.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And I think perhaps it's like because it's also so like remote too. It's like the sense of like connection is like has been hard for me to feel like I access. So I'm like, why am I even doing this? But like also the structure is totally helpful, and even going through the motions of doing projects where you're like, this isn't like really what I want to do as my career. There's still like ways to learn new things that are related. So
yeah, and I think that that's a really good point that you call that out, is like, you know, you are going through school at a different time than I went through school. You know, I can imagine what all of you are having to deal with right now with having to go through school remotely. You know, and I give you a lot of kudos of like getting through it and still sticking with it, because that's hard. And, you know, a lot of the times when you're in a program, it's to work as a group and to work as, you know, around people and go after, you know, class to get a beer and talk about a project or talk about whatever you want. And so, you know, I'm sure that that's not really happening now. So I think, you know, just like wanting to acknowledge that, even, you know, but I think it's like, you know, with that, again, it's like, does the structure work for you? Like, you know, and it's like, you know, Quinn, you were saying, even if it's something, a project you don't want to work on, I think about like, oh gosh, I've worked on so many things I didn't want to work on it just in the real world, you know what I mean? So it's like, again, it's like kind of getting that breadth of what it means to be a designer and working and the deadlines and all that stuff. And that's going to be invaluable that you probably won't be able to do on your own.
Yeah. And will you answer what's
the engineer?
What's an engineer? Yeah.
Yeah. So engineers how do I put it? It's like, if you think about like building houses and you have a designer who's like the architect, and then you have an engineer who does the construction. So, you know, as much as like I said, like as much as I can be like in Figma, like putting together my pixels, or maybe like making like a portfolio or a prototype, someone might not be able, no one in like a user is not going to be able to use it unless an engineer builds it. So they're building code, they're committing code, they're putting, reviewing code, they're putting it out there, they're doing iterations, they're testing the code and like all those things to make sure that it is like professionally done. And so that's a lot of work. And there are people who do both, who can design and who can code at the same time. It's a ton of work. I can't even imagine having to do both. So having someone who is my partner who can take care of that structural basis of writing the zeros and the ones and the JavaScript and what have you to make things, a button change a color when someone pushes it or whatnot, is so valuable, versus me who's just coming up with the ideas of what it could look like, what it could feel like. So that's really kind of the distinction between the two. Is I always say it's like an architect and like someone in construction working together to build a house for someone to live in.
Yeah, and I want to add on to that and say that because the role of a designer is to kind of like imagine the most perfect world, right? A perfect world where they're taking into consideration all the customers. So not just like customers that are using the site, but what the company needs. They're taking all this into account, and they're trying to create like a useful, beautiful experience. And then it's not like they just hand it off and then the engineers go and work on it. There is collaboration that happens. But I like to tell my students I'm a terrible designer, because when I'm designing, I'm thinking about how I'm going to have to solve it in code. And that makes me a terrible designer because it makes me lazy. And I love working with very, very creative designers who don't think about that. They know how to break the grid, or they think about interactions, or they find interactions on the web, on in the internet that they're like, ooh, I want that. They don't care about how hard it is. They don't have to worry about that side. That's on the engineer side to say, okay, here are the plans that you want me to execute on. How the heck am I going to figure this out? Right. So it's really good to have that separation. And when you do have someone who designs and codes, it's really good if they can just like have a Jekyll and Hyde thing where they can just split their brain in half, because you really do have to come at it at a different way.
Yeah, one thing that you brought up too, I just wanted to say, and then I want to get to Justin's question too, is you just make a point that I want to like double down on a little bit, is you're talking about how as a designer you're taking in a lot of information. And I think, again, like the one thing I want to impart on everyone is like, you really have to figure out like what you want to do in design, because you got a whole world of different things you can do. And so I'm telling you about my very specific section of design that I practice, but I also want to be like, take a grain of salt that it doesn't apply across design, overall. But specifically for me, it's like in my roles that I've had, and one thing that I really love to like grow my skill set around is understanding, like, again, like I have so many cheesy bad metaphors, and I'm really sorry that I'm having to subject you to it, but it's like I always think about a designer is like the chef who takes all the elements and all the little bits and pieces of ingredients. So it's like, whether it's the research that you get from, from the users, or you work with a content designer to understand the right words for messaging, and you're understanding the technical requirements from engineering or from products. And you have to take all this information. You also have to like access the business needs and like, how is this design to be impactful to business? It's like, you have to take all of that and synthesize it into an experience. And that is, so it's not just about always picking colors. I think absolutely that's part of it. But as you grow and the more that people will want to work with you, or if you become that designer, specifically in product and digital, and I'm sure in other elements as well, of understanding all those different aspects of work to be able to infuse and synthesize into a vision for the team and for the product as well.
Do you want to jump into Justin's question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I could clarify it a little bit. Sorry. Like, I meant like, I appreciated, I don't know if you were speaking to my question like earlier, but it sounded like kind of like you were, because you were talking about like what aspect of the project you're actually doing. But what I actually meant was when you were talking about your portfolio, because, we're all like going to be you know, if we're trying to do UX, I'm starting to try and gear my portfolio more towards that, and away from like the branding identity projects and illustration and you know, type and stuff, or layout and stuff. But when you built your portfolio, are you actually like I mean, I guess my question is like, what's the best way to showcase UX in a portfolio? Because these products or these designs are not as tangible, you know what I mean? Like, are
Mhm.
you linking them to a Figma file, or are you creating mock-ups, or are you creating like interactive video that they can watch of the app being opened or something? Like, I'm just curious how to do that.
Yes.
All of that. I'm doing all of that. I think with UX, the key thing, and I say this as someone who was, you know, like in my, before I went to Facebook, I was a director of an actual team. So I was like hiring designers and like looking at portfolios. And what I was looking for specifically, and I think a lot of people are looking for, are demonstrated thinking. How did you make those choices that ended up with the pixels that you selected, right? And that's the key to UX. It's like, that's something that I've always like, you know, whether it's a designer that I'm managing or a designer I'm mentoring, I want to understand why you made that choice. And I want it to be clear, you know what I mean? Because the thing about it is like, maybe this will be controversial. I don't think that there's ever a right answer, right? You know what I mean? It's like you're making an educated guess and you're basing it on your instinct and you're basing it on research and maybe like crowdsourcing and feedback and all that kind of stuff. And so, but I want to understand like all those considerations that you took into it, because I want to know that you're going beyond just like, well, this other website has the same thing. They use a carousel, so I want one. I mean, you don't know how many times I've had conversations with clients where they're like, well, they have a carousel. And I'm like, let me give you all the research of why carousels are the worst. You know what I mean? Like why they don't work and like why they have bad metrics and why, you know what I mean? And because I wanted them to go deeper than just the basic things. And so when you're putting together your portfolio, think about how you can put, and unfortunately, succinctly, like whether it's like you can write it out, but you know, maybe think about how do I also make it scannable where it's like 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, so someone can like dive in deeper if they want to. So it's like, you know, a lot of times like you'll hear like show sketches. You know, if you do wireframes, show wireframes, or you know, show a portfolio so that you're thinking about interaction. Like, you know, does it slide in? You know, does it ease in? You know, does it come from the top? Does it come from the sides? Those are the things that I think, especially in UX, like, and especially in product, like people are going to want to see if you are going there and in thinking about that stuff specifically.
Yeah, and case studies are like, I would go look at portfolios that have case studies and just look at what elements they have in their case study, and that'll give you an idea. And you know, case studies can be quite expansive, but just think about doing it for your favorite project or your biggest project. Don't do a case study for multiple projects because
Yeah, they're not going to look at it.
yeah. And this idea of like, make it so that you're not bombarded with information, but you can see, oh, okay, they have sketches, they have user testing, they have, you know, whatever. And then, you know, be able to click into that and see, you know, deeper in, I think is a good idea.
Yeah, and I would also say like in terms of like that idea of user testing, you know, a lot of times I see people like they put like, you know, here's my persona. They're 56, they like coffee, you know what I mean, like all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that stuff's good, but like again, this is a personal takeaway, so like don't, you know, take it for what you will. I always feel like getting that hyper specific about a persona is not really helping the product, right?
Mm.
And so it's like I think it's more interesting when I see something under like user where I'm like, what are the problems you're trying to solve? And why are these the problems that you've identified? You know, maybe it's research, maybe it's, you know, we've got user feedback, or we talked to these many people and they said this was a problem. To me, that is really more interesting than some persona person out there, you know, like, but you're understanding a group of users versus an individual user.
I like that. Yes, I like that a lot because I do hate the personas that always seem to be between the age of 24 and 28.
God bless them. But yeah, there's more people in the world.
I feel like I see between 25 and 39, which is like
Yeah.
so funny because it's like, oh, that's such a wide demographic.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Before I wish this was like 3 hours. But there's an interesting question that I think would be good to talk about. So the question is, where do you find balance in your design, staying you, so your own brand identity, when working for other brands or with other designers, or is individualism overrated? Which I thought was a really
Love this question.
interesting.
Yeah, I thought
Yeah,
this was such a good question.
yeah.
Um, so I love this question because, like, where do I start here? I remember when I was at eRoy, I wrote an article called "You Are Not the You" in User Experience, because I felt like I was seeing a lot of times that people would be designing and being like, well, I don't like it, or stuff like that, right? And that's not, you're not the individual, you're not the person specifically that you're designing this product for. You're trying to go beyond that. However, on the other side of that, you have to start with you, because it's your instincts, it's your problem solving that you're trying to attack these problems or approach these problems and solve for. And so I think when it comes to that, I think it's not so much, for me, individualism is like you stop with yourself, where I think it's okay for you to start with yourself, to start thinking about what's your first instinct of like why you think this is a problem, like what's a solve, and then you need to go beyond that. Right. And then that's when you bring in the user research, and that's when you get feedback, and that's when you talk to other people and you think about other things that maybe you are in your blind spots that you're not getting because you don't have that specific unique experience, or you're not in that specific user's shoes, etc. And so I think it's always, if you want to start with yourself, that's totally fine. And I do it all the time. I'm like, oh, I hate, I would hate that. But I have to also say, but let me put this through user research, because I need to see if my instinct is validated by that qualitative data. Because everything you have is a guess. Again, designing is guessing. You're just like guessing, and you're trying to infer solves. And so it's like, but then you need to prove out those hypotheses with all the tools that you have at your at your hands.
I feel like this is such a good time to transition to design elephants, because that's really what I gather from it is that basically we are starting from ourselves, and we may have some bubble of experience that we understand, but we'll never understand all of our users. So I'm assuming that's the kind of conversations that come up in Design Elephants. So will you tell us a little bit about Design Elephants and what you do, and what your output is, like, what happens in the meetings, what comes out of them?
Yeah, so Design Elephants was a series that I actually founded from a Postlight. And actually, when I left, I actually bequeathed it to another senior designer who had helped me so much to do that. I wanted her to take that on because she was like trying to grow that leadership thing. So I'm not involved in it as much anymore, just because I'm not at Postlight anymore. But when I first started that was definitely like my concepted and founded that, because the idea was that there were so many problematic areas I was seeing in design that nobody talks about, right? And I'm trying to think of like what those means. Like the first one we did, which was really successful, was obviously around accessibility, right? And like how we design just from the get-go needs to be accessible. Like I feel like it's like, you hear about people talking about accessibility a lot, and I don't understand why people aren't doing that from the jump. Like, I don't understand like why you're not trying to think about every aspect of who is coming to be involved with it. Because I think a lot of the times when people think about accessibility in design, they're thinking about, oh, people who are have hearing or seeing, or like have some sort of thing that they're overcoming, like an ailment or something, and they're not thinking about just the fact that like it being accessible to people beyond just yourself, and beyond oh, I have sight and I don't care if someone is like actually reading this this website through they're through a screen reader, or I'm posting images and I don't have alt text, like those kind of things. It's or someone's not from this country and so they don't understand. Maybe they're like a first generation, immigrant who's just come recently, so they don't understand some of the nuances of the website navigation. It's like those kind of things. It's like, that's where I was like, we really need to double down and think about stuff like that. I think another one we were going to talk about was in terms of this idea around, oh gosh, I have to look up what the things ageism was a big one too. We were going to talk about ageism and about how people, like in design, a lot of the times people don't realize the power and the value of people who are older with experience, or maybe have a different path. They didn't go to school and immediately get the high paying job. So it's like they've learned different things because maybe they worked at the zoo or like whatever, you know what I mean? They're not like, they don't have the sexy career, but they have like a lot of experience that could be very impactful, and like there are other voices in the room that need to be heard. So that was kind of my thing around design elements. It was going to be a quarterly event where we had people come and we talked about these things. The idea of being like, they're elephants in the room that everyone experiences. Everybody's like very familiar with these issues, but nobody is talking about them, or they're just like kind of accepted, and that's not okay. So it's like, how do we pull those elephants out into the light so that we can dispel them and at least get a conversation and a dialogue around them, to be able to maybe just kind of shift that conversation as well.
So how can we as designers approach projects with that kind of mindset? Is it just asking, is the user too easily identifiable, or what, what is
I think the number one thing, and actually now that I just remember that so we did the accessibility one and I ended up getting hired out of Postlight, so I didn't get to do the second one, but the second one that was going to be on the docket, and I believe that maybe they did this one, I don't remember, was around ego. There's so much ego in design. Yeah. It's beyond. Like, I don't understand like how people have so much ego. And I will not work with designers who have egos. I don't hire designers who have egos, because the design is not about you. The design is about the users and the problem that you need to solve. And if you make yourself the problem, then it's not going to get solved correctly. And no one can be like, you're not allowing the team to work in a way that is going to be flexible and fluid. Today in this meeting, in a meeting, with my manager, I was like, I always say that I have strong opinions that are very loosely held. You know what I mean? Like, you can talk me out of anything. You can tell me that I'm wrong. I'm fine with it, because it makes me a better designer. The more that you allow yourself and your ego not to rule you, and you let yourself be open and get feedback and understand and the problem at a deeper level, the better of a designer you're going to be.
Okay, I want to follow up that question. And yeah, I'm sorry, I'm like,
no, yeah.
But so everybody will have to work with a big ego at some point, whether it's another designer or someone else in the project.
Or your boss or your manager. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You don't even know the stories.
Yeah.
But I won't, because this is getting recorded.
I know. Totally. So how do you, we'll just pretend it's, from 20 years ago or whatever. But so how do you navigate working with tough people?
That's really hard. I still do it every day. Not anyone in my particular one. I think I've really lucked out into a really great culture and an environment with design where we don't have a lot of big egos running around. How did I navigate it? I navigated it in a couple of different ways. One of them is, and this is going to sound weird, is like, I went to a salon, like a design salon, when I was at PNCA, and I went to go see a founder of, I think it was OMFG Co. At the time. He was one of the founding designers, and he gave really good advice where he's like, even if you don't like this person, or it's the worst client or the worst manager you've ever had, like, never let them see you sweat, essentially. Like, never let them see your frustration with them. Like, you still need to show up every day and just be the best that you can be, right? And so there's that. So, a lot of it, I would just kind of like try not to react to, and and not take it personally, which is really hard. It's a lot easier said than done. And then a lot of the times too, it's like, I would assess the situation and be like, what am I getting out of this? You know what I mean? And so
Yeah, it's a good one.
If I was at a place that I was like, this is going to set me up for the next role that I want to have, then I would like figure out how to navigate it, whether I would work harder or maybe even have a discussion with them, or, you know, try to relate to them or whatever. Again, it's like, it's hard because it's like, I'm not a really good, like, I don't have like specific advice about how to specifically do it. It's like you have to learn your way and what's enough for you to be able to take on, you know, but also know your limit and know your boundaries. And know that like when you just are like, I can't take this and it's not worth it, or they're abusing me, or, not abusing me, but they're crossing my boundaries or what have you. And then, you know, when you need to like remove yourself from that situation.
Yeah.
But I mean, the thing about it with egos is like, I've gotten to the point now, I think, where I always have this joke that I've been designing for so long now that I'm like dead inside, like nothing phases me anymore. You know what I mean? So it's like, I'm kind of like, I've been there, I've done that. I've had the late nights, I've had the like crazy managers, you know what I mean? So, and so it's like, I've developed a kind of a thicker skin around it. And that's not good. I don't want the advice to be like, oh, just have a thick skin. It's like, just know what is your value. And figure out like whether it's talking to your fellow people and finding people that are allies for you to navigate that ego, or if you feel comfortable to have like a non-confrontational conversation with them or be able to ignore them, like find your key to be able to navigate that ego. Because, and I think like each time you do, then the next time you'll hopefully be able to navigate it a little bit better. And then the last thing I'll say about that too is a lot of the times people who have big egos are very insecure. And so that's the other thing, is I try to also have a little bit of empathy in the fact of just knowing like, this isn't about me, this is about potentially this person feeling themselves that they're not good enough. And so again, it's like, how do I separate that from myself so that I'm not getting affected by their ego, when it really probably goes down to like how they face themselves in the mirror every day.
Yeah. And sometimes it's opinions that have been passed down to them, and they feel like they have to kind of uphold the opinion, whatever the opinion is. And I've had situations where when I was very young, in my early 20s, and I was a manager and I worked with an older guy. So I was a woman and I was a kid, and we just we butted heads so hard that we finally just got a third party to come into the room, and we had like a civil conversation with someone else there. And then after that, we developed an understanding where we never got along, but we were okay after that. So when you do get to that point where you're like, I can't do this, I just can't do it, I have to quit or whatever, just know that humans do this. We have to figure things out. You can work with people that you don't like and still be okay with them. So just, if you ever find yourself in that place, just take a deep breath. There's always an answer. Almost always an answer.
Yeah. And it's like, and it's something that you like, that dynamic too of, you said you were, had a male boss as a woman who was working for him, that is, and not to like, get down that road too much, but that's something that I think female designers, and those identifying as female are going to have a hard time. That still exists, it's still there. And so it's like, again, it's like really doing and practicing how to know your worth, so that you aren't taking that on, or taking on their bad behavior and having it reflect, like having you feel like it has anything to do with you as well. And it's annoying and painful, but use your voice. Like, I mean, I've been in meetings where literally I've had a colleague be really rude to me and I called them out on it immediately. And they didn't even know, and then a lot of times too, it's like, I use humor to be like, oh, LOL, like, don't talk to me that way, and so it's like, learning your mechanisms to be able to push back on that, because you shouldn't accept it and you don't have to accept it, and you have voices, and it's never okay. So
Yeah, that's great advice. Lots of people want to know what's up at Meta. They want to know like if anything you can talk about the future plans of Meta. And also there are many, many Nike fans in PSUGD, and they wanted to know what it's like. Was Nike a client, or did you work at Nike?
Nike was a client. Yeah, it was a client. And I kind of work like, I didn't work directly with them in that sense. It was more of client work that I did where I was putting together wireframes and concepts for them in terms of future ways of like their e-commerce. And so I got pulled in to like do a bunch of stuff like that. So I never worked with them directly. I have a lot of friends who've worked with them and like worked there and stuff like that. So I think you know, they're an incredible brand. Like they're an incredible brand, and it's an incredible opportunity. I personally didn't want to work there because I wasn't interested in sportswear and I wasn't interested in e-commerce very much. And so it's like really being able to navigate and understand like what exactly type of design you want to do to be able to get into like, and I think this is like, it's not Nike specific. I think it's any large company. It's like really understanding what the culture is there, the design culture, and like what kind of design you're going to be practicing, so you're not stuck doing like presentations or constantly or something like that too. So that's kind of my advice of overarching of like large companies, like understanding what you're getting involved with too as well.
Yeah, and with a company that large, you need to really think about the group that you're joining. Because it's so large, every group is going to be different. They're going to have different dynamics, different approaches,
Absolutely.
different management style. So my advice about any interview is, even if it's a place that you're excited about, remember that you're interviewing them. Like you need to be happy, right? Like they need to find people, sure, but in the end, it's like your happiness that's important. So remember to interview them, when you're in there.
Yeah, and I would say even too with the happiness, one thing I've learned as a designer too, it's like be responsible for your own happiness. Don't try to look for happiness with your work life. You know what I mean? Like that's
Yeah.
a transactional relationship where they're paying you for your time and for your expertise to do something in your skill set. And so make sure that you're like looking for places outside of work to find your happiness as
Yeah.
well. But also make sure that but not to say that you have to work somewhere where it's like soul crushing. Like, you want to find that sweet spot where you really enjoy what you do, but you're also finding happiness outside of work as well.
And we're running close to time, and that actually loops back to something that I wanted to kind of retouch on, which is this balance between school and self-taught. And I know you've probably been involved in hiring designers, and I've been on a lot of hiring teams. And what I look for, and like I would like you to also speak to this, is I look for people who have passion about what they're doing enough that they have their own projects. So I don't, as a hiring manager, I don't care so much about school, although many places have that as a requirement. So it does kind of get a foot in the door in a lot of places. But I care more about experience and passion. So if someone has gone to school or they've gone to like a UX UI boot camp, if they stop work as soon as they graduate and then they're just looking for work and they're not continuing with like a passion project, I probably won't interview them. Or I will have trepidations, and I will ask them, what have you been doing since school? Aimée, will you talk a little bit about that? Like, as a hiring manager, what do you look for? I think that'd be a great way to finish out the talk.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely look for, I think the school is the last thing I look at, to be quite honest with you. Like that's the last thing I look is like where you went to school. I'm looking at the work, period. I'm looking at the work. Is it interesting to me? Do I see potential there? Am I seeing really good design thinking? I mean, it depends on the role. Like when I was at Postlight, I did look for people with a little bit of experience just because in an agency world, it's really you have to have a certain skill set of understanding like what it means to be doing client-based work and working with a PM, working with engineers, like delivering client work on a deadline. And so I would look for even like the most basic internship, like some sort of experience where they kind of understood what they were getting involved with. But not that's not always the case, just like for that specific place. But yeah, I mean, for me, it always goes back to the work. I want to see the work, and then I want to have a conversation with you, and I want you to talk to me about the work. One thing that I tell designers who come to me, who ask for like mentorship or questioning or anything like that, is learn how to have a narrative around your work. Learn how to talk about your work in a really engaging way, in a way that people are following along a story, because you will have more success versus saying, oh, well, then we did user research, and then we did this, and then we did this. Be like, so this is what we were kind of thinking around this area. These are the questions that we're asking. You don't have to answer every question, and you don't have to have every problem solved when you're presenting work, but you do have to be able to speak about it in a way that is engaging to people. Because whether if you're doing agency work where you're working with clients, or freelance where you're working with clients, or even like, for me who's in-house and I'm having to like get team members on board or leadership on board to okay work, it's like you have to learn how to speak, and it's essentially kind of sell your ideas and sell your concepts and why they're important and why people should be giving them you resources and their time to be able to work on it. And that's to me like the number one thing. I think is like I look at the work and then I want to have a conversation with you. And if those two things feel right and it's like something, then I think everything else kind of falls into place for me.
That's really excellent advice, and it gives me ideas for how to run a critique, so that we're focusing on that narrative. And something I thought of when you were talking is that a lot of times places will have position for junior person or a mid-level person or a senior person. So if any of this feels overwhelming, do not worry. There is a job for you. And also if you aren't selected for a job, it just means that your skill set doesn't match up. It doesn't mean, that you are not a valuable designer. It just means that you just never even know, you just never know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the last thing I would say too is like approach job looking right now as a marathon, not a race. You know what I mean? Because from where I started to where I am now, it took me a lot of different jobs, different roles, taking on different responsibilities to really understand how I wanted to be a designer and like what kind of design I wanted to practice. And the only reason why I'm like, I have done that was because I did so much work, like investment in that time before, and sometimes did stuff that I didn't want to have to do and worked with clients I didn't want to have to do, or had mean, art directors or whatever, you know what I mean, who were mean to me, you know what I mean? And I dealt with it, but don't think that like, I just don't put the pressure on you right now to be like, I need to find the perfect job right after I graduate from school. It's like, it's pace yourself, like figure out a way, like, is it first an internship that maybe turns into a job that maybe you can learn some skill sets there, and you look to see if there's another place you want to go. Like one thing I always tell my designers too that I manage, sorry, I think we're a little bit over, but I want to like impart this on you as well, is always and they couldn't believe that I said it to them as I'm like, we're working together. I said, use this job to figure out what the next job is you're going to want.
Yeah.
And that way you can shape the job and take on those roles and jobs and projects and whatever you want to do to be able to get that access, to be able to go and sell yourself to another position that you want to learn. And that's going to like help you grow as well. Because that is just the best way for you to be able to navigate and ultimately figure out like what you want to do and change up and learn new things constantly. That's the fun thing about design. It's always changing and there's always something new to challenge you.
Mm-hmm. And Justin, I'll just say, no, your age is not a detriment. You are like, you're in peak age and you have life experience that is valuable.
Oh, Justin, I'll tell you, I never say this out loud. It's probably, I mean, I can't believe I'm putting out there, but I went back to school at PNCA when I was 37 years old. And I am now 47 years old and I'm, working at large tech one. Don't worry about your age at all. Like it's your life experience is going to get you farther actually, because you have a lot of things that a lot of younger people don't maybe know, like I don't know what your background is, but like maybe it's working with clients, maybe it's selling yourself, maybe it's customer service, like even working in restaurants, like learning how to multitask, like draw all of that, put that into your design, you're going to be fine.
Yeah. So thank you so much. This was really fun. I hope everybody enjoyed it. And we'll be sharing the recording at PSU. Maybe because of the boss stuff, I won't put it on YouTube. We'll see. But anyway, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for coming. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you guys all so much. I wish I wish we would have had a time to like. I would have loved to like just like talk to each of you too, and just kind of like understand where you're at too. But feel free to like send me any questions. Like I was you at one point, and people that were in my position opened up time to answer questions for me. So like definitely feel free to get my email from Alanna, and if you have any other questions, let me know.
Yeah, and here's Aimée's website too. So you can find her.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for your time. My gosh, you're in school.
And now it's dark because we're in Portland and it's so dark.
Oh, I know. It's what time is it? It's like 8 o'clock here. So New York. So,
oh yeah.
But yeah, thanks you guys so much for spending time. Good luck to all of you. I'm sure you're all going to be brilliant, and it's exciting. I've been where you're at, and it's so exciting. So I hope you guys find it exciting as well.
Yeah.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Have a good night.
You too.
Cool.